Good morning. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, How Craft Producers Can Find Value in Sustainable Practices, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. Save the date for our next webinar in our craft beverage series happening July 29th at 11 a.m., and that topic will be announced soon. We are recording today's presentation and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, please type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistance Program Manager, Chris Van Orden.
Thank you, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation on how craft beverage producers can incorporate sustainable practices without compromising profitability. As Sheila said, my name is Chris Van Orden. I'm the manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance Program at the Virginia SBDC. So today's program is going to be a free-flowing discussion about the ins and outs of kind of the sustainable practices from the field all the way through production. You're going to be able to enter any questions that you have in the Q&A function. We'll do our best to answer them all either during or after the webinar, and I absolutely encourage you to ask questions about anything that we say, or if you have a question about the application for your specific business, please feel free. So I'm excited to welcome today's speaker, Steve Haring, founder and director of Virginia Agroecology Services. Steve has over a decade of experience as an agricultural researcher, including PhD research in orchards and vineyards at UC Davis, and experience with annual and perennial cropping systems across the U.S. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, appreciate your time and your expertise here. So, right, I think it might be for this topic great to kick things off with the why of all this, right? Obviously, people have personal beliefs about sustainability, which are great, but I think that a lot of companies that maybe have a bigger team or certainly investors, you want to be able to articulate why you would want to incorporate sustainability into your business. So why might a company decide to be more sustainable as part of their model?
Yeah, I think that for me, a lot of this really does have to do with kind of the personal belief that sustainability is the right thing to do. This is something that I care about. And I think that everybody should be able to have access to food that is produced sustainably. And people don't want unsustainable agriculture. People really do want to be eating food that is sustainable.
Mhm.
And the beverage industry specifically is such an important vehicle for this kind of sustainability messaging, sustainability connection, because consumers in the beverage industry, our
Mhm.
customers already care about sustainability. And out of everything that you eat in a meal, I think that beverage is, a glass of wine, a craft beer. This is something that people are willing to spend money on. People are trying to build a connection to that product, and people are looking to try something new, and that's happening. Hopefully, people are able to do that throughout their diet, but the beverage part of this is something where there's really an opportunity to grow sustainable agriculture and create that industry that's unique to Virginia, unique to the Mid-Atlantic, that has sustainability as a core value. Not just because of my personal belief that it's the right thing to do, but because it's something that people can connect to, and it's kind of industry-wide effort. And so there's kind of these different levels of value, the personal beliefs that we have, but
Mhm.
also that the value that people are, that brands are able to communicate to their customers and their consumers, these different levels. And so, yeah, beverages, I think part of the reason is that consumers are already primed, they're already looking for that. And also beverage producers tend in general to have kind of shorter supply chains. They're more focused on quality, less focused on having really slim margins, and there's just room for, it still is a challenge, but there is room compared to other parts of our diet, where beverage producers are able to, on the one side, work through their supply chains to develop sustainability, and then also to get value through their marketing, by creating a premium product and really building that connection with consumers and the things that we already care about and already looking for in a craft beverage.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, craft producers in particular, right? Consumers don't treat this sector that we're talking about today just as, hey, what's the bottom dollar here? The whole value
Exactly.
proposition is the personal connection, is the storytelling, is it's the liquid has to be a part of it, but I think everybody that's tuning in knows it's not enough to make a good product. It has to have some sort of personal connection because if it was just the liquid, well, there are really big producers out there who make a good product that's probably half as, the price of your product. So finding those values, those connection points for the consumers. And I think that, as you said, if this is something that people already care about, you're able to tell that story. And, if you have these sustainable practices, both yourself and in your supply chain, if you can tell that story of like, hey, I know the person, I'm the one that's out there doing these things that are in my vineyard, or I know, that where my malt comes from. If I'm a brewer, that's a differentiation point to be able to position yourself in a really competitive marketplace and find a new selling proposition, right? I'm not trying
Yeah.
to be crass or anything like that, but it's right. I mean, this is a business in the end, and
Yep.
if it gets you to endear yourself to more customers that way, absolutely people should be leveraging it because there's plenty of people who do it and maybe don't think about how to use it to the fullest extent.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
another question that we can talk about. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well, and I think that just like craft beverages, this is an opportunity where we can connect with people and create a singular experience, a singular product, and sustainability connection to the land is already part of that conversation. It's something that we can continue to build on there.
yeah, that's a great point. I think the sort of decommodification of all this stuff,
Sure.
right? It's not just like it's again, why would people buy from you? They want it to feel it's unique, special part of that. It's getting away from the sort of bulk mindset.
Sure.
So right, that's just a couple of the whys, right? So maybe we can now talk about what we mean when we say sustainability. There's some really big visible markers of sustainability, like in your organic certifications, and we can talk about that in a bit. But when you're working with producers, what's this like the sort of full range, the spectrum of sustainability that you speak about?
I think that there are a lot of definitions of sustainability and sustainable agriculture specifically. And the kind of the high level idea of creating a system that is able to perpetuate itself, a system that continues itself, and continues to move forward. That is a solid definition that comes up again. There's a legal definition that the USDA uses in its Natural Resource Conservation Service and National Institute of Food and Agriculture programming. And I was just going to read that because I think that this is a really comprehensive way to drill down into the
Yeah.
self-replicating system. And so this is in the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. The term of sustainable agriculture is an integrated system of production practices that have site-specific application that over the long term, there's 5 criteria. It satisfies food and fiber needs. So you have to be growing food. That's the point of the system. Ultimately, there's a product to create. People need to eat. The second thing is it enhances environmental quality and the natural resource base. So, improving the environment and not extracting resources, but leaving things for the next time you go out in the field. That's critical. Makes efficient use of non-renewable resources and on-farm resources, and integrates where appropriate natural biological cycles. So there's this kind of idea of using resources appropriately and trying to rely on natural cycles instead of taking these resources out. And then sustaining the economic viability of farm operations. So economics, this is sort of where we move in more into the social and human aspects of sustainability, and then enhancing the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. So this is something that this has come up a lot of times for me as a solid formal definition. A lot of people participate in sustainable agriculture without thinking about all of these aspects, but I really wanted to bring this up because it kind of alludes, and I can highlight that sustainability is a multi-dimensional thing that is going to look different in different applications. And a lot of times when you're in one place, you're working on one sustainability goal, there's a trade-off with another kind of sustainability goal. So that happens on the farm all the time. It's going to happen in our supply chains, in the brew house, in the winery, where there's always kind of a balancing act, and it really depends. So
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I'll say as a, former Fed, I love the pulling the receipts on CFR. It's pretty great. I mean, that's it's codified, right? That's very interesting. And I think that, importance of saying this is not just, not just an ag thing. I think, right, it's maybe the easiest thing to think about, visualize sustainability in that. But I mean, we're talking about things like, your non-ag inputs, right? Thinking about what are you packaging in, right? Those kinds of questions, energy usage. We're going to talk about some of these things in a bit here, but right, there's a whole range of things. And I think that it was interesting that economics of this, that there has to be economic viability, and the sort of social element of this is part of the conversation too, right? This is a pretty comprehensive thing. So it's not singular, and no company should try to hold itself to a standard of reaching some sort of perfect sustainability threshold. I mean, that is going to move and change all the time anyway. But I like it as a kind of framework, or sort of comprehensive, I don't know, guiding principles, or even a lens in which to view your individual business operations, because in the end there's a rubber meets the road element of this here, and we can walk through this a little bit. So as I was saying, maybe the easiest way to visualize sustainability, right, is in the field. There are producers that in Virginia, lots of them, that have a direct connection to the growing process. So you're a state winery, or if you're a cider maker with your own orchard, you have the final say over the agricultural practices you employ for your raw ag inputs. So yeah, I'd like to hear just a little bit of some of the easiest understood, and maybe some of the lesser known ways that growers can be more sustainable.
Yep. I think that this, even out in the field, that classic sustainable ag, boots on the ground kind of thing, we still want to be mindful of the kind of environmental as well as economic and human dimensions of sustainability, and all three of these dimensions are playing out differently in different fields. And ultimately, if you have an agricultural system, you want to be able to produce, like getting good crop yield is yield and quality is essential. And if you're compromising on crop yield, then that is kind of undermining the whole point of the system. And so having good fruit, good grain that you get out of your farm system, quality, kind of the optimal balance of quality and quantity, in the beverage case for sure. I think that that's critical, and we make these decisions in order to support good crop yield, and hopefully there are other environmental benefits that we can achieve at the same time, right? But if you are going out in the field and you're always risking a crop failure, you're producing a product that doesn't make people want to buy craft beverages from Virginia, that's kind of undermining the whole deal, I think. So it's always good to choose these practices to think about the end result. If we are in this situation where we're working in an integrated, a sustainable supply chain, we know that this is malting barley, we know that these are wine grapes. We can make agricultural decisions that hopefully improve the product that's in the glass, which is not something that everyone has the luxury of doing in agriculture. I think that's part of that opportunity, that excitement that I have about working with beverage producers and beverage industry is sustainable ag. venue, I would say.
Yeah.
As far as the specific sustainability practices, I think that there are two kind of classes, and this will come back again in the production space, but there are going to be things that we can do from the start when you're establishing an orchard or a vineyard, or when you're building up a farm operation. There are sustainability practices that um, choices that you're making from day one that will affect you for years. And this is kind of infrastructural things related to equipment in the orchard and vineyard, perennial crops, your variety choices, stuff that you're making decisions on that has consequences for decades, even when you're, just starting out. So it can be really tricky to get that stuff right. And especially in Virginia, have there are challenges with disease management in wine grapes, and it's really critical to choose wine grapes that do well with spray programs that, fungicide programs that are sustainable in the long term. And a lot of vinifera is really challenging. The classic European wine grapes, it's hard to grow in Virginia. And we rely on spray programs that um, I mean, if you have a existing vineyard, right, you need to spray that stuff. Otherwise, it depends on the situation, right? But most growers have to spray fungicides that are less sustainable because you need to achieve that crop yield in the end. But if you're just starting out, there are varieties that you can choose that rely fewer chemical inputs. So, it's hard. It's hard because, I would like to never have to spray a fungicide,
Hmm.
but there are growers that I work with where I recommend spraying weekly, right? So just depends and situational. Um, and then on the row crop side, I mean, things having to do with equipment, infrastructure. I would say it really depends on how sustainable you want to be from the start. And I think that a lot of the practices I'm about to talk about on the other side, it's always going to be easier if you have that infrastructure and the equipment from the beginning that's facilitating no-till agriculture, no-till planters, no-till seed drills. Um, that's like expensive stuff that not everybody can just go get, but it's really important. Um, I think bread and butter sustainable ag practices that everybody can do. It's going to look different in annual and perennial cropping systems, but cover crops is something that I work with a lot. It's really important in Virginia, especially. We have rain all year round. It's really important to have the ground covered all the time and have plants actively growing in the soil, putting carbon into the soil, improving soil structure. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest bang for your buck thing that you can do to improve the sustainability of your system. Vineyard cover crops going to look different than in a small grain field, right? But that is critical. And then the other thing that I think everybody can approach is integrated pest management and thinking
Hmm.
more critically about um, preventing pests and using cultural practices in your field that allow you to use fewer pesticides. Um, my academic training is as a weed ecologist, and I've spent a lot of time doing integrated pest management work. And it's always been there's like some tension between agriculture as this professional discipline where our goal is to grow and raise up a crop, but we spend a lot of time and effort and energy thinking about killing pests. And so striking
Hmm.
that balance between what do we need to kill, when do we need to kill it, and what is the best way, or maybe we don't need to kill this stuff at all, right? This is
Hmm.
agriculture is about growing stuff up. And so, like I said, IPM is going to look different situations, but um, I think that these two practices are probably accessible to every grower in every context. And everybody can be a little bit more sustainable, even if you don't have the infrastructure, even if you're fighting an uphill battle, there's still ways to be a little bit more sustainable within any kind of field context.
Yeah. No, there's a lot to touch on there. And I like the, right, if you're getting started or expanding or retooling out in the field, whatever that might be, there are things to do to make your life easier downstream, right? Certainly cultivar selection, and there's, I think a lot of winemakers now are getting excited about lesser known varietals, maybe if they're from but from kind of wetter regions in Europe, or some of the hybrid varieties that are coming out now in Virginia. Virginia's kind of a leader in the space, which is great. And the same goes for small grain growers. And there's trials that are happening through Virginia Tech that are some really interesting kind of barley varieties that are coming online that are better suited to this climate. Great. On the cider front, I think you see a lot of people looking at heritage apples that are natively work well here, instead of choosing something that might be brand name, but you're not well suited. And then, of course, right, just how you set things up. I think that's really important. You can't go back necessarily and train your vines differently, but thinking about this is right far from my area. You probably know a lot more of this yourself, Steve, but right, how are you trellising your vines? Are you allowing sufficient airflow in there to prevent kind of damp, dark places where fungus is going to run more out of control? Right. Those are things to do on the front end, but obviously it's not, you're not just going to tear out your entire vineyard to try and improve that. So finding other ways, even creative ways to manage some of the sustainability issues, right? Some of the issues with growing without having to resort to like less sustainable practices. And you see cutesy ones where you have, ducks going and eating your pests in between the vine. Like, okay, great, that's nice, but I've been to small grain growers and they say, hey, there's certain pests that we can't keep up with them in the field, but we take the grain out and we put it in a cold box. And as long as we keep it down below this temperature, it kills everything. And then we sift it out, right? Hey, there's all kinds of ways. And I think that's the power of having this community and experts like you to go and say, what are the options that are out there? Maybe you don't have to go for the craziest, very most aggressive sustainability thing. There might be another solution that works better for you and your specific business. So
yep.
Lots there. Of course, right. This is all for people who are out there in the fields or the vineyards, whatever it might be, in the orchards. There are plenty of other producers, like most breweries and distilleries, that aren't directly involved in the upstream agriculture, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways for them to be more sustainably minded when kind of working with their partners. So what are some tips that you give to companies that want to be more sustainable but don't grow their own inputs?
I think that sourcing and working with sustainable ag producers is probably going to be one of the biggest levers that a lot of, especially for the most part, we're talking about grain-based beverages. And some people in the cider industry are sourcing all their juice as well, but it's a big operation to produce enough grain to support a brewery, just because that business model is different than the state winery, right? Or these distilleries. A lot of times we have to go to the Midwest or to Europe in some cases to get malt, because that stuff isn't grown in Virginia. It's hard to create that state operation. It's not saying that it's impossible. There's definitely there are people in Virginia doing it successfully already, but most of the time we're talking about grain. This is an agricultural product that ships well. You can get it from the Midwest and it still is very high quality, and that's where the big maltsters are. And I think that producers, the beverage manufacturers, are able to cultivate relationships with their growers and with that supply chain, and look how are we going to make this product more sustainable, because it's a little bit of a chicken or egg issue, I think, and a lot of times craft beverage producers aren't necessarily big enough to really ensure or change the supply chain. They're working within a supply chain that's already existing, but without that demand, it's never going to happen, in my opinion. This isn't just about, or I guess I would say it's not necessarily about local sourcing, and locality is kind of in sustainable agriculture dialogues, people aren't talking as much about food miles anymore, because it's just not a concept that has stayed relevant. And there are a lot of reasons why shipping something might be a sustainable option. And the other part of that also is that Virginia is a pretty big state. Arlington, inside the Beltway is as far from Tennessee as it is from Massachusetts. So that's kind of, if you're going by a food miles definition, I mean, it would encompass the entire Midwest or the entire Mid-Atlantic. So, it is a big challenge, but this is something that, um, it takes a long time to kind of build these supply chains, and for
Hmm.
producers, for beverage manufacturers, I should say, producers is something I say, but call farmers that as well. So beverage manufacturers, they need to start working on this now because it's a long-term project, and those connections don't come up overnight. So you need to work hard and build those connections, invest in that kind of relationship where not only do the beverage manufacturers get a more sustainable product from a more sustainable supply chain, but also there's something on the other end where farmers have incentive to put into that as well.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's a tough thing, right? I mean, we're talking about small scale farmers. I mean, maybe you can help if there's enough demand, some of the bigger suppliers of agricultural inputs, right? You might move the needle. They might introduce an organic line or something, who knows?
Right.
But a lot of the times the sustainability stuff happens at the small scale, right? And it, the chicken and egg analogy is totally right. They would like to scale their business. They'd like to put out more products that might be on the more sustainable scale, but they need the demand signal. And the small producer, like obviously trying to preserve margins, all of these things, but finding ways to work with them. And I think sometimes having frank conversations with suppliers can be really useful. Just saying like, hey, I want to use more of my product. Right. It's hard to be scattershot. Would you prefer that I come to you for base malt, or should I be sourcing all of my specialty malt for you? What's works better on your side? Um, and then having frank discussions about, well, like the driving factor of my pricing is going to be this, right? I need to be able to craft beers at this point. I can't have a 20%, uptick in ingredient costs by switching over like this. So is there a ramp up way? Right. Thinking about ways to um be smarter about ordering. Is it quantity discounts? Is it saying I'm going to focus on, specific products that are going to start with these sustainable inputs to start and then roll it out over time. So I think there's that connection with the suppliers. All this stuff takes a long time, especially when there's another set of hands touching it.
Yeah.
Nothing in ag moves swiftly. I mean, maybe at best you're on an annual cycle, but
Right.
right, that we're talking about a long time. So um, I think open conversations and consistency in those relationships is really important.
Yeah, and it's just to drive this home again, it's not an all or nothing thing, right? You
Hmm.
can be a little bit more sustainable. You can be more sustainable on a percentage of your supplies, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Can't let the enemy be the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Just saying like you're not a sustainable producer or manufacturer or not. It's saying, hey, we're doing things, we've made some strides, right? It's a progression. Um, so speaking about kind of the telling the story of all this and conveying this to an audience, third party certifications, there's a lot of them out there, right? These sometimes are just seals or like logos that you could put on your actual product, or you might say on your website. All of these things, they attest to some sort of sustainability practices, but as a lot of people listening will know, um, they can be very costly, very time consuming, very demanding, and maybe impractical at times for smaller producers to pull off. So can you give us a little bit of a rundown of the options that are out there for folks that are in this sector when it comes to third-party certs?
I'll try to be brief a little bit. There are loads of certifications out there, and we have to talk about organic. I think that it's, certified USDA certified organic is a gold standard in a lot of ways, in that the requirements are very clear. They are also spelled out in the CFR. Um, Everybody's playing by the same rule book, and there is a ton of consumer awareness. People have been paying attention to the certified organic label for decades. It's, the section in the grocery store. These are all good things. We want to have a label that is clear and that people know how to use and is creating value on our product. You put that seal on and there is a price increase. People have studied that. I think challenges are, like you said, that it is can be burdensome because of the structure of the program. Those clear regulations aren't always interpreted the same way by organic certifiers. I think that there's a major ongoing challenge with value added producers. So it's easy for my farm to become certified organic. If I want to create a farm winery, then I may or may not need a separate certification. Depends on the certifier in a lot of cases. And then certainly the third party, if I'm selling malt, maybe the malt store needs to be certified organic and then the brewer again. And
Mhm.
so that adds some layers. And I think that certified organic is really a strong option if you're participating in large supply chains, even international supply chains. It really excels on that, but it just can be challenging because there are these kind of layers of bureaucracy in a lot of cases, right?
Mhm.
And then I think that there are ongoing concerns, I would say, within I think this has been going on from the start. People are concerned about whether the organic certification is truly representing the intention of the organic movement. So there are these add-on certifications that you can get once you're organic certified. Some people want to become Demeter biodynamic certified. I can talk more about that if people have specific questions. There's also like Real Organic Project and Regenerative Organic Certified. So there's all this stuff that kind of illustrates that once you're organic certified, um, it is a gold standard. I still think that's true, but there are challenges. There's additional hoops to jump through, and a lot of times before you're getting that value out of your product. And then because of these challenges, there are other kind of in parallel, not add-on certifications, but additional certifications that you can get. And there's at least a half dozen different regenerative agriculture certifications. And without getting too deep into what regenerative is, these are kind of general sustainable ag certifications. And I think at this point, a lot of them are too new to really have value in terms of, I put the seal on, I can charge more for my product.
Mhm.
What do they communicate at this point? But there is a Regenified certification that seems like it's picking up a little bit of speed from food retailers, and some larger manufacturers are starting to use it. Still has a challenge of being this kind of universal thing. Does this have true meaning in every agricultural field? Is this really sustainable across the US, across all cropping systems? Are my grapes supposed to be held to the same standards as beef in Montana, right? These are questions that are still kind of unanswered. And it's really hard. Like, what do these really communicate? I think that it's important to be able to communicate some of these factors if you're speaking through a grocery store shelf, through a wine list or whatever. But if you can communicate to your customers directly, a lot of times it's going to be able to tell a more complete story with less challenge, less uncertainty, less paperwork. Um, and so I think certifications is really something you need to be looking at if you're taking the step into a bigger market, to a larger supply chain at times. And then I was going to highlight there are some regional wine sustainability certifications. I don't know of any in the Mid-Atlantic yet, but there's a live certification in the Pacific Northwest that's low impact viticulture and enology. There's one in Central California, a kind of similar one in New York State. And I think that there's a SIP certification started on the central coast of California, and they're trying to go nationwide. But again, it still is a little bit like um, not necessarily developed enough where consumers are, this is something you'd be bringing to your customers as a beverage brand rather than something that people are demanding at this point, I'd say. And then this is the ag stuff. We can go on and on about certified B Corp, right? Uh, renewable energy certifications. My tasting room is LEED certified. All this stuff does have sustainability impact. But I think it's important for producers, beverage manufacturers and agricultural farmers to be intentional about the couple, one or two certifications that really represent what I'm trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think that's
What
great.
do you think, Chris?
It's
Does that help?
yeah, no, that's great.
Help clear the waters? Yeah.
Yeah, it's clearly a lot of choices here, and I think that
Yeah.
it's good to get a handle on what's out there. I mean, I think the point about this needs to have an impact on the business, right? In the end, there are plenty of people who hold themselves to organic standards but decide not to certify because of the burden. And they say, hey, we
Yep.
can tell the story of our own practices better than this specific seal is, and the cost for establishing and maintaining organic certs. Maybe there's other things out there, and other things that are more useful for us. Um, I think you're right. Like, true organic certification is the certainly the most widely known and accepted out in the marketplace, but right, everybody's a little bit different. And if you're telling your own story, and especially if it's a big part of what your brand is about, hey, maybe you want to be more explicit in the things that you're doing and say, and I think biodynamic is certainly the next best known, especially in the wine world, right? Of just being like, hey, people, that's a term that people get. And I think there are, retailers that are positioning those products in a different way, which is right a meaningful market distinction. So I think that's um interesting. And right, if a seal is, or if a seal from organic certification is not right for you, you know, is it benefit corporation? Is it 1% for the planet? Are there other things that you can do? Is it talking about, yeah, like energy usage? Is that where you hang your hat? Lots of options that are out there. But in the end, I think finding, whether it's a third party or your own storytelling, find a way to demonstrate what you're doing, because in the end, you can do whatever you want, but the things that you might believe in, and you might set a pretty high standard for yourself, but if people don't know about it, then right, that's a good thing for yourself. But if people place value on it, it should be benefiting your business. So that's I'm sure we could have a whole conversation just on that, but
Yeah.
we can move on here to talk about um, right, the production process now. So we've been talking about the sort of ag stages up through here, but as value add producers, your breweries, wineries, distilleries, cideries, that are looking to be more sustainable, have lots of tools at their disposal in the production process. So what are some manageable strategies for improving sustainability on the production floor?
I would think about this kind of similarly to the agricultural sustainability side of it, where there are things that you can do with what you have, as an established business. How do we get this process and make it a little bit more sustainable? And there's probably a separate conversation to be had if you're just starting out, or if you are designing a new facility, you have new infrastructure that you can get to achieve sustainability. Probably at every step in the process, there's going to be things that you can do in your existing sustainability, small decisions about packaging, what kind of energy source potentially, um, is there kind of heat transfer stuff that we can do to be more efficient? And a lot of times, the more efficient choice, the more cost efficient choice, a lot of times it is the same as the sustainable choice. And so, I mean, a huge portion of the beverage industry has moved to cans, and cans are lighter weight, they're easier to fill, they are more shelf stable, right? These are all good, more efficient kind of things. They're easier to recycle. That's critical, right? Um, and I think that's a good thing. Cans are not perfect. They do have plastic liners. Usually they have plastic labels on them as well. So we've made this, part of it is a little bit less sustainable, but it's not all or nothing. We can make these little choices throughout. I would say that another big thing that a lot of beverage manufacturers can think about is about participating in renewable energy programs, and the utilities, Dominion and App Power. These electric utilities in Virginia both have renewable energy programs that you can participate in. And like all things, there's a trade-off. Those programs, I don't I'm not super deep into them, but they're not perfect. They're more expensive. And so this is one of those areas where it's a little bit, you need to make that business decision. Is this going to be more sustainable? Um, on the balance, right? On the balance. I would say we can talk more about this, Chris, as much as you want, but I'm interested in CO2, carbon dioxide is kind of an underexplored manufacturing input that has a big sustainability trade-off. And sometimes you don't need infrastructure, you don't need a CO2 recapture device, a CO2 scrubber to be more sustainable in your your manufacturing facility. You can just get a spunding valve and ferment under pressure, right? And that's recapturing some CO2. Um, but there's also this infrastructure opportunity. And it's not just the carbon dioxide that you are using more efficiently in the brewery, but you're also able to kind of obviate. You're able to avoid the emissions associated with manufacturing that carbon dioxide, which is usually there's more CO2 released in the atmosphere than what you actually have in your CO2 tank. So that's a big thing that's kind of underexplored. Then I lived on the West Coast. Water was a big deal out there. It's less of an issue in Virginia, but thinking about these, water infrastructure, water, electric, CO2, these are kind of electric or, energy in general. Those are kind of those big things I would think about just starting out designing a new facility.
Yeah, there's a lot here, and I think, you're right. Some of it is investing that in equipment, or is it something that with relatively minor modifications or upgrades, you can make progress towards that. And I think it's a point that you made early on, I think is really important to stress here is that here, right, when you're talking about kind of selecting inputs and maybe opting for more sustainable inputs, okay, you have to tell the story. Ideally, it results in kind of a higher market value or more sales or something on these because they're often tied to utilities. The investments that you're making into sustainability directly result in cost savings a lot of times, which is great. If you find a way to be more efficient with your water usage, your water bill goes down. If you have more sustainable, energy or let's say heat transfer as a for instance, if you're passing hot wort and beer and then you have your hot liquor tank, that you're feeding, if you have those run past one another, you're transferring some of the heat from a liquid you're trying to cool to a liquid you're trying to warm, you just reduced your boil time. Like that's great, right? These are things that you can do to just shave pennies, but obviously every time that you're producing, you see these incremental gains. And if you can, with a pretty quick kind of back of the envelope math, figure out your ROI, you might say, hey, in a year, this thing's going to pay for itself. And after that, we're saving money. Well, okay, that's a quick enough ROI that you can kind of build that in. The event horizon for big infrastructure upgrade might be 10 years. And you could say, well, can we make that investment now? Do we need to wait? But there might be some things that you could do incrementally in the meantime to kind of improve sustainability and start realizing savings pretty quickly. So it's cool. It's tons, a whole huge area. As I say in a lot of these webinars, I'm definitely not a deep expert on any one area, jack of all trades here for sure, but I find this particular side of production really interesting, finding the ways that creative problem solving sometimes can get people moving in a good direction. So, right, we talked about like the production side, costs, right? Obviously, it's great to be able to say, hey, we're going to save money eventually. In general, right, companies, many companies want to be more sustainable, but sometimes that they get a little bit of sticker shock. They balk at the cost here. How do you help companies think about planning for these kinds of investments?
Well, Chris, I would say, like, as you were just saying, there's so many things, so many options, so many little tweaks you can make both in farming and manufacturing to be a little bit more sustainable. There's enough meat on this bone that we can really start with the win-win solutions that are obvious. There are sustainability solutions that, it may be an investment, but that new piece of equipment may unlock a farming practice that pays for itself because you can spend less time in the field, spend less on fuel, spend less on chemical inputs. And if you are able to find the sustainable solution that is like meeting multiple dimensions of sustainability, I think that that stuff is out there and it's available to a lot of producers now, depending on what their situation currently looks like, right? These are business decisions ultimately, and like you talked about at the beginning, I would love everybody to have that personal value system where they really are looking for sustainable solutions, but a lot of times there are opportunities for um, return on investment. This is a good business decision that also happens to be more efficient, more sustainable, better for my employees, all that. And so if I mean, not every business owner in the beverage industry is thinking strictly as a business. A lot of times we're very passionate about some aspects of this business, but if we really look at dollars and cents, I think that there's meat on the bone there for sure for sustainability as part of a regular business decision. Just may take some time to pay off.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, some of these things are easier to do the math on, other ones,
Yep.
right? It's about market perception and kind of positioning yourself in a crowded marketplace. And some of this ROI is contingent upon being able to demonstrate to an audience the sort of value of your sustainability and having them choose you, right? Whether it's increased sales or paying more per product, whatever that might be. So can you talk a little bit about the sort of ways that companies can get some of that ROI from this market side of things, from like the downstream consumers?
Sure. Yeah, I alluded to this earlier, but a lot of this is again going to be context dependent, and it's a lot more difficult if you are selling primarily through distribution. If you're able to
Hmm.
make a direct connection with your customer and tell your story, that is going to be a much easier lift than trying to communicate, basically through multiple layers of telephone or telepathy or whatever, trying
Hmm.
to beam that message. Um, yeah, and I mean it's really tough, but I think a lot of it comes down to just being intentional and creating the ethos, this vibe about this product is something that is good for the environment, it's good for the community, and we want to include you in that. A lot of times, that's the best way consumers know when something is authentic or not to some extent, right? And
Hmm.
um, cultivating that kind of image, that overall storytelling is going to be a lot more, I think, effective in the long run than trying to, make specific claims, put specific labels on your package. Um, my wife and I took a long weekend last weekend to the Hudson Valley, and I ended up
Hmm.
buying a beverage product that had 7 different sustainability claims on the can. And I was actually pretty turned off by, I mean, it's like light up like a Christmas tree. How many different messages can you throw at the wall? But I still bought it because it seemed like the vibe that they cultivated was similar to what they were trying to claim.
Hmm.
And um, some people are, I mean, some people do respond to the specific claims, but at some point, beating people over the head with this is not as effective as being intentional and working towards that as a long-term project.
Yeah. And I know sometimes it's a sometimes where people worry about that, or maybe worry that sort of an overemphasis on sustainability comes at the cost of quality. So right, it's ultimately craft producers really hang their hat on quality. Hey, this is a better product that you can get from me. But it sounds a little bit kind of advertising speak, but that kind of brand identity, right? Who are we as a company? Like, what, you know, kind of values do we tie into? I think that there are ways to do that. Gosh, probably year and a half ago, I did a webinar with the director of Herd Ventures about the sort of storytelling, and he comes from an ag background and talking about, he talks about how small producers can kind of convey the values. And this sustainability is often a core value of a lot of producers, and
Mhm.
finding the strategies that are going to resonate with your audience out there. And like, as you said, especially the further you go from, the direct interaction with the consumer. It's very easy to, if you're a vineyard, you get 85% of your sales from the tasting room. You can take them and you say, those are my vines right there. I'll walk you out there if you want to see what it looks like. It's another thing when you're making a product where you're sourcing inputs elsewhere. It goes through 3-tier distribution. The retailer doesn't know you from Adam. Okay, well, how do you find ways to do that? Different strategies, but there's finding a way to convey that message is really important, because otherwise you're just doing it for your own purposes. And I think, as a business, you want to make sure that the consumer kind of gets that too. So we had a couple of questions that came in. Resources professionals that help us. This is what Steve does. He's a great person. You can always reach out to the SBDC and we can see if there's other people that you might be interested in speaking with. And then there was a question about incentives for any sorts of milestones or certifications in sustainability. Are there any incentives that you're aware of, Steve, for more sustainable practices?
There are a lot of state incentives and also federal programs that help people implement sustainable ag practices, and it's really confusing. The programs are well developed, but mostly developed to serve larger growers, and so it can be really a challenge to navigate that. But there definitely are from federal programs that pay for a specific implementation of a single practice in a single field, all the way up to large grant programs to complicated loan programs and stuff like that. And I would also say that there is a lot more third-party funding out there for regenerative ag kind of stuff. There are growers that do benefit from tax incentives, state programs, but a lot of times these are not incentives that are accessible for beginners. So that does make it a challenge. And also in the current political funding environment, a lot of that stuff is even less accessible for a variety of reasons. So,
yeah, it's a fast moving space right now. It's
exactly.
out there. And I think having a conversation, with an expert to know something might seem really appealing on paper, and then you'd say, well, hey, let me tell you that they're actually going to be zero funding this program, or their standards are so high it's really impossible to meet their standards unless you have this scale or something. Some of it is once you start digging, there's a lot of things out there, but knowing a little bit of the history and context so that you're not spending all of your time going after particular incentives, or same goes for certifications. That may not kind of map onto where you're at as a company. So I think having those conversations before you dig in and coming up with a strategy for ideally applying for and winning or whatever, getting certified, those kinds of things. We are coming to the close here. So we had somebody who mentioned working on a bottling plant to generate my own biodegradable. Oh, that's great. Packaging is its own thing. We touched on that briefly, but right, there's a lot of packaging, a lot of the weight of these products is packaging. And so it's another really important area just to think of what does your packaging look like here? And I think everything from, kind of recycled corks for wine, and what's your printing material for your labels, kind of the recycled glass, all of these things are just another part of the puzzle here. So I guess to wrap things up here, I'd kind of be interested to hear your thoughts on some of the most exciting things that are happening on the kind of frontier of sustainability in the craft beverage sector.
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but I think that it is a good thing that the craft beverage industry is maturing. And the Virginia taproom bill was 15 years ago, give or take 10 to 15 years ago, right? And so in this time, there's been a huge change in the industry, people coming in, people exiting, and so that's why it's a double-edged sword. But we're getting to the point where it is easy to be serious. It's easy to be intentional about these business decisions and making sustainability a core of your business, and then also being able to overcome that challenge where a lot of times small producers, sustainable producers are not always achieving the same quality standards. And so like to have this professional industry where people are looking to Virginia as a serious place to get serious beverages, I think that is the most exciting thing, and we can use that as a springboard to be serious about sustainability. I would just remind people again that it's not an all or nothing thing. Sustainability is multidimensional. There's always going to be trade-offs, so you don't have to be perfect. But as a small business, this is something to work towards and be serious about in whatever way you can. I think that's exciting. That's what I would take away.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, nobody's ever going to be perfect here, but I think it's everybody's moving in the direction that they want. That's great. Well, Steve, I'm sure we could keep going, but I think we're nearing the end of our hour here. So I'm just going to say thanks so much for sharing your time and expertise on these subjects. It's really interesting and dynamic space, and there's a lot happening now in particular. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's great to be able to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Stephen, for all the wonderful information you shared today. I also would like to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you for being here. As a reminder, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we do hope to see you all at our next session. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.